had spent years building this company. Late nights, early mornings, every sacrifice, every deal, every breakthrough, it had my fingerprints all over it. And yet, as I stepped into the conference room that morning, I felt it. Something wasn't right. The board members were all seated, their eyes darting toward me with a mixture of discomfort and unease. I knew these men. They had once respected me. Now they wouldn't even meet my gaze. And then I saw him, my husband, Theo, the man who had promised to build an empire with me, sitting at the head of the table, looking too composed, too prepared. And beside him, a woman, young, beautiful, smug. I knew that face. His so-called assistant, the one who had been getting closer and closer to him over the past few months. But surely, this wasn't what I thought it was. Was it? I pulled my chair back and sat down, forcing my voice to remain steady. What's going on? I asked. A tense silence followed. Then my husband leaned forward, clearing his throat. The board has made a decision, he said. Calm, detached. I frowned. What decision? His fingers tapped against the table. We're restructuring. We need fresh leadership. I blinked. Fresh leadership? I had been running this company. I had built it with him. What was he talking about? That's when the young woman beside him smiled. And I realized, this was a coup. They weren't just restructuring. They were removing me, replacing me, with her. A sharp laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. You're joking. Silence. My heart started pounding. I looked around the table expecting anyone to stop this. No one spoke. Not even the men who had once told me I was the backbone of this company. They had already made their choice. You can't be serious, I whispered. You're putting her in my position? My husband sighed, as if I was being difficult. She's young, ambitious. She's incompetent. His jaw tensed. That's enough. I let out a breathless laugh, shaking my head. You're handing everything we built to a woman with no experience? A woman, you. I stopped myself before I could say it. But his eyes darkened, like he knew exactly what I meant. Like he wasn't even denying it. My stomach twisted. I turned to the board, my voice sharp. I'm the COO. I have just as much stake in this company as he does. You can't just. My husband slid a file toward me. My resignation papers. Already printed. Already signed. All that was missing was my signature. I stared at the document, feeling the walls close in. This wasn't just about my job. This wasn't just about the company. This was betrayal. A man I had trusted. A business I had built. A life I had poured my soul into. And in one calculated move, he was erasing me. Sign it, he said quietly. I looked at him then. At the man I had built an empire with. At the man I had loved, trusted, sacrificed for. And all I saw was a stranger. I could have fought. I could have screamed. I could have dragged him and his little mistress into hell with me. But instead, picked up the pen. And I signed. The room was silent. No one moved. No one expected me to let go so easily. They thought I was weak. That I was accepting defeat. That I was done. But they had no idea this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. I stood up, pushing the papers toward my husband. Then I turned to his mistress. She was smirking, victorious, smug. She thought she had won. So I leaned in, my voice just loud enough for her to hear. You have no idea what you've just taken from me, I whispered. Her smirk wavered. I smiled. Cold. Calculated. Deadly. Enjoy it while it lasts. Then without another word I walked out. And I didn't look back. Because if he thought I would disappear quietly, if he thought I would fade into nothing, then he had made the biggest mistake of his life. Because now, I had nothing left to lose. And when a woman has nothing left to lose, she becomes unstoppable. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't break down the way they expected me to. I walked out of that boardroom with my head held high, feeling their eyes on my back, waiting for me to snap. But I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. They had taken everything from me. But that only meant I had nothing left to lose. And when a woman has nothing left to lose, she becomes dangerous. I spent the next few days in silence. Not because I was weak. Not because I was lost. But because I was planning. While they celebrated their victory, While my husband's mistress sat in my chair, pretending she had earned it, I was already 3 steps ahead of them. They thought I would disappear, that I would fade into nothing. But they had no idea I wasn't just coming back. I was coming back to destroy them. I had always been smart, efficient, ruthless when I needed to be. But now I had one thing I never had before. I had rage. And rage, when wielded correctly, was more powerful than any business strategy. So I did what I did best. I worked. I calculated. I built. First, I gathered my people, the employees who had been with me since the beginning, the ones who had no loyalty to my husband or his pathetic mistress. They had watched what happened to me. They had seen the betrayal. And they were ready to leave with me. One by one, I made my moves in the shadows, quietly pulling my best people from the company, stripping my husband's empire bare. And he was too blind to see it. While he was parading his new CEO around, showing her off like a trophy, I was already building something bigger, something stronger, something that would crush them both. And by the time they realized what I was doing, it would already be too late. The first major deal I landed shook the industry. I sat across from some of the biggest investors in the country, men who had once shaken my husband's hand, who had once seen him as untouchable. But now they were looking at me, because they knew power when they saw it. And I had it. I was it. The moment my company was officially launched, the business world took notice. And when the press release went out, when my name appeared in headlines again, not as a fallen COO, but as a new CEO, I knew. He saw it. He had been so busy indulging in his victory that he never realized I had been playing a different game. And now the empire he stole from me? It was seconds away from crumbling. I could picture the moment perfectly. Him sitting in his office reading the news. His mistress beside him, panicked, because she had no idea how to fix this. Because she was never meant to run a business. Because she was never meant to be me. I didn't answer his first call, or his second, or the dozens of messages he sent, demanding to see me. Now he wanted to talk. Now he wanted to explain. Now, when he had already lost me, I laughed. Because I was already too far ahead. Because I didn't need his explanations. I needed him to watch. Watch as I took back everything. Watch as I built something bigger than he ever dreamed of. Watch as his company bled, as his world burned, and realize, this time he couldn't stop me. And when the stock prices started to drop, when investors began pulling out of his company and bringing their money to mine, when he finally understood that I wasn't playing small anymore, that's when I knew. I knew I had him exactly where I wanted him. I sat in my office staring out at the city skyline, feeling the power in my veins. He thought he had gotten rid of me, thought I was just a woman he could replace. But he had underestimated me. And now, I was going to make him regret it. Not just today, not just tomorrow, for the rest of his miserable life. Because I wasn't just coming for his company, I was coming for his entire empire. And when I was done, there wouldn't be anything left. He saw the headlines. The moment my company went public, the moment my name was splashed across every business article as the rising CEO who built an empire from nothing, he knew that he had underestimated me, knew that I wasn't the woman he left behind, and knew that this was only the beginning. But he wasn't the only one panicking. His mistress, the one he had so proudly placed in my chair, the one he had betrayed me for, was finally realizing she was in over her head. And I was about to watch them both fall. The cracks were already showing. Clients were leaving. Investors were backing out. The people who once stood beside him, praised him, believed in him, were now watching him struggle. And the best part? He had no idea how to fix it, because I had been the one keeping everything together. And now that I was gone, his empire was nothing but a sinking ship. His mistress was the first to break. I knew it was coming. I had spent years working beside him, fixing his mistakes, covering his weaknesses. She had no idea what she was doing. She thought running a company was easy. She thought sitting in my chair made her powerful. She thought being the CEO's favorite was enough. But now, as the walls started caving in, as the board members questioned her decisions, as the employees refused to respect her, she realized too late that she was never meant to replace me. I heard about her first meltdown from an old colleague. She snapped at the entire board today, he said, amusement laced in his voice. Said she wasn't going to be treated like an assistant. I laughed, because that's exactly what she had been. A woman who was given everything but had earned nothing. And now? She was drowning. The final blow came when I landed a deal that had once belonged to them. A multi-million-dollar contract that had been in my husband's company for years. And I took it. Easily. Because the people in this industry, they knew who the real power had always belonged to. And it wasn't him. It had never been him. His first call came that night. I saw the number flash across my screen. I let it ring. And ring. And ring. Until finally it stopped. Because he wasn't worth my time anymore. His second call came the next day. And the next. And the next. And still I didn't answer. Because he had made his choice. Now, he was going to live with it. But then he showed up. At my office. Unannounced. Desperate. His face was pale. His suit not as sharp as it once was. His confidence shattered. For the first time he looked like a man who had lost everything. And I had never looked stronger. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. For a long moment he just stared at me. Like he couldn't believe I was real. Like he couldn't believe how much I had changed. Then finally, in a voice I barely recognized, he said, "We need to talk." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "No," I said simply. His jaw clenched. "I'm serious." "So am I." His hands curled into fists. "Are you really going to act like I never meant anything to you?" I smiled, cold, detached. "You didn't mean anything to me," I said softly. "Not anymore." He exhaled sharply. "I made a mistake." I arched a brow. Which one? Betraying me? Replacing me? Or assuming I would always be there when you finally realized what you lost? His lips parted, but he had no words. Because he knew I was right. He tried again. "I need your help," he admitted. "The company." I laughed. Loud. Unbothered. "The company?" I echoed. "The one you stole from me?" I shook my head. "No. That's your problem." I leaned in, lowering my voice just enough for him to feel the full weight of my words. "Figure it out yourself." His fingers tightened around the chair in front of him. "You don't understand," he said through clenched teeth. She's ruining everything." Ah, there it was. The real reason he was here. It wasn't because he missed me. It wasn't because he regretted hurting me. It was because the woman he had chosen over me had finally shown him who she really was. And now he wanted me to fix it. How pathetic. I smiled. Not because I forgave him. Not because I cared. But because I had one. Because he was here in my office begging me for help. Because I was untouchable now. And he was nothing. I stood up, smoothing out my dress. Then, in the calmest voice I had ever used, I said, "You chose her." I grabbed my coat. "You built your empire with her." I walked to the door. "You destroyed me for her." I turned to him one last time, my eyes cold sharp. "So now," I whispered, "die with her." And then I walked away. That night I heard the news. His mistress, his precious new CEO, had been caught embezzling funds. His company's stocks plummeting. His investors pulling out. His board members turning against him. And I didn't lift a single finger to help. Because I had already won. His downfall wasn't just happening. It was unfolding in real time. Every news outlet was covering it. Every business analyst was predicting his company's inevitable collapse. Every investor was scrambling to pull out before it was too late. And I was watching it all happen from the top. The same way he had once watched me fall. His mistress, ***, the woman he had placed in my chair, the woman he had humiliated me for, ***, was finally exposed. For months she had been stealing from the company, embezzling funds, using business accounts to fund her own lavish lifestyle. And now, everyone knew. The first time I saw the news I smiled. Not because I was surprised, but because I had always known this would happen. She had never loved him. She had never wanted him. She had wanted his power, his money, his name. And now she was running, desperately trying to escape the chaos she had created. The day the scandal broke, I received a message. Not from him. From her. The woman who had replaced me. The woman who had once looked at me with mocking eyes, thinking she had won. Now, she was the one begging. We need to talk. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I deleted it. 'Cause she was irrelevant now. Just like him. But he wasn't done trying. He had already come to my office once. Already begged me once. But now? He was desperate. And desperate men? They do stupid things. I should have expected it. Should have known he would do something drastic. But even I was shocked when I arrived at an industry event, a high-profile gala filled with business elites, CEOs, and reporters, and found him waiting for me. Waiting. On his knees. The room fell silent. The moment I stepped in, all eyes turned to him. He was there in the center of the grand hall, his suit slightly disheveled, his face pale and strained, and in his hands, a ring. My ring. The same one I had thrown away the day I left. I let out a slow breath watching him waiting, because this was his last desperate move. His voice shook as he spoke. I was wrong. He swallowed hard, his knuckles white as he clutched the velvet box. I was blind. I was a fool. He lifted his gaze to mine, and for the first time, there was nothing left in his eyes but regret. I need you. I tilted my head slightly, pretending to think. Then in the coldest voice I had ever used, I said, and I need you to get up. A gasp rippled through the crowd. But I wasn't done. You don't love me, I continued, my voice unwavering. You just lost everything else, and now you think I'll save you. His fingers trembled. That's not true. I smiled. Sharp. Ruthless. Unforgiving. If you really loved me, I whispered, stepping forward, just close enough for him to feel the full weight of my words. You would have never let me walk away. His shoulders sagged. The weight of every mistake, every betrayal, every regret finally crashing down on him. But I wasn't finished. I turned to the crowd, my voice carrying across the silent room. You all witnessed it, didn't you? I gestured toward him, the man who had once thought he was untouchable, now kneeling in front of me like a broken man. This is what happens, I said softly, when you throw away something valuable for something cheap. The whispers turned to murmurs. The murmurs turned to full conversations. His reputation, destroyed. His dignity, gone. And the moment I turned and walked away without looking back, he knew. It was over. That night the headlines were everywhere. Former CEO humiliated at gala, begging his ex-wife for a second chance. Once a powerful businessman, now a fallen empire. How he lost everything, including the woman who made him. I sipped my champagne, enjoying every word. Because now, the entire world knew the truth. He wasn't just ruined. He was forgotten. And I was just getting started. I thought that after the gala he would give up. That after begging me in front of the entire business world, after being humiliated, after watching me walk away without hesitation, he would finally accept defeat. But some men, they don't know how to let go. His calls became more frequent. His messages more desperate. I ignored every single one, because he wasn't reaching out of love. He was reaching out because he had nothing left. The company was collapsing. His board was voting him out. His investors were pulling their money faster than he could stop them. And the only person who could have saved him was the woman he threw away. He showed up again. In my office. This time he didn't look powerful. Didn't look arrogant. Didn't look like the man who had once sat across from me in that boardroom and torn my career out from under me. No. He looked exhausted. Worn. Hollow. The weight of his own choices suffocating him. And I had never looked stronger. He stepped inside, his voice hoarse. I need your help. I leaned back, crossing my legs. Help. I repeated. You mean the way you helped me when you took everything I built? He swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. I stood up, walking toward him. You made your choice. I stopped right in front of him, staring into the eyes of the man who once thought he was untouchable. And now, I whispered, you live with it. His fingers clenched at his sides. I can fix this, he muttered. We can fix this. Together. I tilted my head. You think I want to fix anything with you? His breathing shook. I loved you, he said, almost pleading. I let out a soft, sharp laugh. No, y murmurat. You loved owning me. He tried again. We were partners once. We built something incredible. I smiled. And now I've built something bigger. Without you. His jaw tensed. You're enjoying this. I leaned in slightly. Oh, you have no idea. His entire body went still. 'Cause now, he finally understood. I hadn't just moved on. I had erased him. I walked back to my desk, picking up a folder. Then, in one swift motion, I tossed it onto the table between us. He frowned, hesitating before reaching for it. His hand shook as he flipped through the pages. And the moment he realized what he was looking at, he paled. His voice cracked. You. I smiled. Cold. Ruthless. Unforgiving. I own your company now. He flipped through the documents again, as if reading them twice would change reality. But it wouldn't, because this wasn't a mistake. I had planned this. Every move. Every deal. Every investor I had quietly pulled away from him. Every step toward taking back what was mine. And now, I owned everything. His breathing turned uneven. Why? He whispered. I arched a brow. You really have to ask? His knees buckled and for a second I thought he would fall. That was when I knew. I had broken him. Completely. Irreversibly. And I felt nothing. His voice cracked when he spoke. What happens now? I tilted my head. Now. I let the word hang in the air before I smiled. Now you work for me. His body went rigid. His eyes snapped to mine, disbelief clouding his expression. You can't be serious. I shrugged. You have nothing left. No investors. No allies. No power. You're broke. I leaned in slightly, my voice dripping with amusement. If you want to survive, you have no choice but to take a job. His throat bobbed. You wouldn't. I smirked. I already did. He stumbled back, shaking his head. You can't. I can. I let out a soft sigh. I could let you rot, you know. His breath hitched. I smiled. But making you work under me? I leaned in, lowering my voice to a whisper. That's a much better punishment. He knew I was right. Knew that he had no power anymore. That I was the one holding the leash now. And I was never letting go. His mistress, she was gone. Vanished. Ran away when she realized he had nothing left to give her. He had thrown me away for her. And she? She had thrown him away just as easily. How poetic. He exhaled sharply, his hands trembling. I leaned back against my desk, watching him. You once told me I wouldn't survive without you, I murmured. His lips parted, but no words came out. I smiled. And yet, I gestured around us, at the empire I had built from the ashes of the one he tried to destroy. Look who's still standing. That was the moment he knew. He had lost. Not just his business. Not just his career. He had lost me. Forever. And that was the greatest punishment of all. He swallowed hard. What do you want from me? I smirked. Everything. I thought taking his company would be enough. That watching him sign a contract to work under me, that seeing the disbelief in his eyes as he realized his entire world now belonged to me, would finally feel like the perfect ending. But as I stood in my office, looking down at the city that was once his playground and was now mine, I realized something. I didn't care about him anymore. I had already won. And that meant it was time to walk away. The first day he showed up as my employee, he couldn't even look me in the eye. He walked into my building, into my empire, wearing the same suit that used to make him look like he owned the world. Now, it made him look like a man who had lost everything. Because he had. And I was untouchable now. The whispers started immediately. People who had once worked under him, who had feared him, now looked at him with nothing but pity. A former CEO. A former business giant. A former somebody. Now, he was just another employee in my building, working for the woman he had betrayed. The first time he tried to talk to me in the office, I didn't even acknowledge him. He stood outside my office door waiting, like he thought I would call him in, like he thought I would give him a second chance. But I didn't, because he didn't exist in my world anymore. I made him sit through meetings where I made decisions he used to make. I let him watch as I closed deals he once thought were untouchable. I watched his hands clench when his name was no longer listed on anything important, because he had already been replaced, because he was no longer necessary, because the world was already forgetting him. But the final blow? It wasn't taking his company. It wasn't making him work under me. It wasn't even watching him fall apart in real time. It was what I did next. I left. One day, without warning, I called my team into my office, and I made the announcement. I'm selling the company. The room went silent. Even he, standing in the back, stiffened. His head snapped up, eyes locking onto me for the first time in weeks. He looked shocked. He thought I wanted to run this empire forever. He thought I would never walk away. But that's where he was wrong. Because I had never wanted the company. I had only wanted to take it from him. And now that I had, it meant nothing to me. The press exploded. Former CEO loses everything. Ex-wife sells company after taking over. She didn't just take his business, she took his legacy. The ultimate revenge move, and why she walked away. I smiled as I read every single one. Because this was the real victory. He had destroyed me once. And in return, I had taken his entire future. And I never even had to keep it. The last time I saw him, he was sitting in his office. Not really his office, because it didn't belong to him anymore. Because nothing belonged to him anymore. His suit was wrinkled. His hands were shaking. His face was no longer sharp, no longer confident. For the first time, he looked small. Like a man who had finally realized he was nothing. I stood in the doorway watching him. He must have sensed me because he slowly looked up. His lips parted, his throat bobbing. You're really leaving? I smiled. Soft. Amused. Pitying. Yes. His jaw clenched. After everything? I tilted my head. What else is left for me to take? He inhaled sharply, his fingers curling into fists. What am I supposed to do now? He whispered. I gave him the same words he once threw at me. Figure it out yourself. I turned to leave. He didn't stop me. Didn't call out my name. Didn't beg me to stay. Because he knew it was over. Truly, completely over. And I had already moved on. I walked out of the building into the sun, into a future that was finally mine. No longer tied to him. No longer defined by the betrayal. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about freedom. I had rebuilt myself from the ashes of the woman he destroyed. And now, I was never looking back.